podcast, season 3, episode 4. We're here with the OG Martin Mayorga. This brother has been a huge inspiration for me, kind of a mentor for, a couple years now, has done a lot of crazy stuff for the company behind the scenes. And I've learned a lot from him as a person of color, as a melanated person in this space. And so we wanted to bring him for this episode so that we could be able to, share what's going on. There's some wisdom here if you're a minority person trying to create equity for folks who come from your motherland through coffee, or just a minority person in business in general, like trying to create space in these kind of white dominated spaces. Maybe there's something here for you. And honestly, I think just the advice that I've received over the years and conversation we've had would be useful for anybody interested in branding, marketing, and building a stable business in general at all. So without further ado, want to shout out Martin Mayorga of Mayorga Coffee. Used to be Mayorga Organics, but it's not that no more. It's Mayorga Coffee, and that's a branding move too. So I would love for you just to get a chance to introduce yourself, and then I want to get into what you've been sipping on lately.
Yeah, so I was born in Guatemala, but raised in Nicaragua. We left Nicaragua during the revolution. My parents told me we were going to Disney World, and we drove to the Costa Rican border and left the car and left everything behind. So my family pretty much lost everything to the revolution, lived in Costa Rica for about a year, got kind of asked to leave because there was too many Nicaraguans, went to Peru, and eventually came to the U.S. as refugees of the revolution. And ultimately, I went to college. I went to Georgetown. I studied finance. I was being recruited to go to Wall Street, and I thought I was going to be this Wall Street guy. And then in 91, my dad started taking me back to Nicaragua. I was 18, and it just hit me, man. Like the things I'd seen before that when I was a kid didn't feel right. The people living in poverty who were the same people growing our food, and just poverty everywhere, man. But at the same time, there's like really nice, bright positivity and happiness, and it really hit me. And I realized, man, I've been given the huge opportunity and blessing to come to the U.S., to be given an education at a school like Georgetown, to learn finance. I have to do something with it. So I literally left college and I went to Nicaragua, and I stayed at a cigar factory, because my first step was to learn about cigars and see what I could do to help from that side up. And then an uncle of mine who grew coffee was telling me about the coffee supply chain and how bad it was for him. And I started bringing in coffee directly from him to sell to roasters in 94, 95. And theoretically, I believe we were the first to ever do direct trade in the mid 90s. I think we were the first to do a lot of things, but the industry, and we'll talk about it a little bit, doesn't give me credit for it. But it's all right. I don't need the credit. We just need the impact.
Facts, man. Facts. No, that's super crucial. I think that's one of the things that I've always really respected about you, bro, is just like you're really impact focused. And I think that we'll get into that. What you been sipping on, bro? What kind of coffee you been drinking? How you been brewing it? Let's get into a little coffee nerd talk before we get into the game.
Well, so I'm going to preface this by telling you that I like my coffee, but I purposely don't nerd out on it. And like I always tell Eduardo, the people, and I think I've told you this, I don't want to ever get to a point where I put the coffee on a pedestal, right? The coffee cannot be on a pedestal, because then I might lose focus on the people and the reality of what I want to create. Mm-hmm. That being said, we've been getting some great naturals. Perla Negra out of Costa Rica has been great, but lately I've been drinking the Dulce Amor, which is out of Colombia. And I travel all the time. Right now I'm in Miami. I live in Costa Rica, heading to DC tonight. And I usually travel with the little fellow travel mug, which I don't have here with me, but the little travel mug and little pour over filter. Here at my place in Miami, I have a ratio 8, and it makes a nice pot of coffee. And I literally at 4:30 in the morning sit down with my pot of coffee and a journal. I'll drink the whole pot. And
wow.
Yeah.
I like that. I'm sipping on this. It's actually our first like technical medium roast that we've ever done. It's from Congo. It's a Mapindo Woman Collective, and we're gonna be dropping it in like the subscription box in the fall, in October. And this thing is like really like it's red apple-y, which is it because we do a lot of Ethiopian coffee, and so those are like very floral, very tropical. This John is like plums, red apples, baker's chocolate, like very, I don't know. I can't stop drinking it. I'm not even gonna lie to you. And last week we had Jim from my piece, and he was telling me about the history of coffee in Congo. And I always like knowing the history of a place, kind of what you were saying about like, the people mattering more than the coffee. My mom used to tell me all the time, people matter more than things.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, man, I think I've always thought that like if I focus on the history and the art and the culture of a place first, the coffee always tastes better. You know what I mean? This is a washed coffee. It's not a crazy, you know what I mean? It's just delicious, good coffee, bro. But I do appreciate that. And I think that's one of the things I really appreciated from you. And we can kind of get into this now that the Coffee Nerd Talk is over. Like, speaking of that, one of the things you really told me when we first got started, which is how we met, is kind of crazy. Like, it was just on Instagram. And you were like, yo, bro, I see you're doing this thing. You're trying to speak up for your people. I did the same thing in the 90s for Latino people. If you're cool, let me kick you some game. You know what I mean? On what this might be like and some pitfalls to avoid. And man, from like purchasing our first roaster to training my wife how to roast coffee so that we could roast our own coffee, to being one of the first donors for the documentary and the trip to Africa and matching our sales. Like, y'all have done a lot to really, just from the phone calls, everything, bro. Y'all have done a ton over the years to help us get started and to support us. And people always ask me, especially when it comes to the all black supply chain, right? Like, oh my gosh, how can you do something like that? Like, that's so exclusionary. Like, what if somebody did an all white supply chain?
They do. They've done it for 100 years.
I was like, have you seen?
At least the top up, yeah.
Yeah, have you seen how the money is spread on any supply chain in coffee? But I always say, like, it's funny, man. Like, the person who showed me that this was even possible wasn't a black man. Like, it was you. Like, I remember talking to you, and you're like, yeah, we have an all Latino supply chain. And I was like, you can do that? And that really inspired me to just want to create that shared equity and a sense of pride. I know you all have, my Spanish is terrible, but is it aruglo? Am I saying it right?
Our tagline?
Yeah.
Orgullo Latino, which means Latin
pride. Orgullo. That's what I'm saying. It's the pride. Orgullo means pride, right?
Yeah.
And like the pride that I haven't visited y'all space and seeing the pride that y'all built, like, it's really inspirational for me to want to create a space similar for my community in coffee. And so, man, just share a little bit about what it was like for you early in the 90s and coffee being even more as white as it is now, as monocultural as it is now. It was even more so that in the 90s. Share a little bit about what that was like and why you started to really pivot toward focusing on your brand instead of focusing on the specialty coffee industry and kind of all the trends that pop up there.
Well, I'll tell you what's interesting. When I started, like I said, nobody was doing what we're doing. Nobody was importing green coffee. I was selling to roasters, and I had a lot of lessons. There weren't many roasters. In the DC area, there was like 2 small roasters. And they literally told me they didn't like the thought of buying coffee from Latin America because they buy it out of New York.
Wait, what?
They didn't like the concept of committing to coffee in Latin America because it's right there in New York for them. So, I had
wow.
And that was the first moment where I said, okay, well, now I need to become a roaster because these guys are clueless. They can buy their bags in China. They can buy, but for some reason, buying coffee from the origin country was too risky, too many variables. And they literally just wanted it out of New York. So I started roasting in the mid 90s. And to be honest, and here's the reality. And, a lot of people say that I'm jaded with the coffee industry and maybe I am, but here's why. When I started, man, we were pioneers and we were celebrated. I was in the Washington Post. We were in, National Geographic did a story with us. We were just, everybody thought it was so cool what I was doing, and it was very supported by the market, very supported by consumers. We continually grew. At one point in the early 2000s, I had 12 shops, including all the major airports in the DC area and Pittsburgh. I mean, we were freaking killing it. And then you start seeing these kind of new guys pop up around 2012 or so. And it's all about, we only roast light. Anybody who roasts dark is hiding, defects. Mayorga doesn't sell real coffee because they sell blends. Mayorga doesn't sell real coffee because they sell Latino coffee, and that's not quality. And what I started seeing was the momentum we had built was so powerful and positive from the consumer side. But once the industry wanted to change the narrative, Mayorga was not cool. It's not cool. I mean, I had competitors tell my producers, you shouldn't sell to Mayorga. They sell blends. They're ruining your coffee. Well, those guys now are only selling blends because they realize that's what people want. And for me, look, I'm great at business. I'm great at finance. I'm going to run a business with a soul, but I'm going to run it with a brain too. And I'm not going to go lie to the market to create a new market. I'm going to find where the market is and give them something they want so that I can achieve what I want to achieve and create the impact I want to create. So I started really seeing a major shift there. I'm like, oh, wow. So being Latino is bad to the coffee industry. Representing my culture is bad to the coffee industry. Focusing on the coffee I saw my grandparents and my dad drink is bad to the industry. And it sucked, man. It was a kind of hurtful where it's like my own industry looks down on who I am, doesn't celebrate who I am. Yet they're buying from these farmers, they're talking about these farmers, and they're talking about supporting my communities. Well, they're really not. And it really shifted my mindset. And it was a good thing for me because I could have easily gotten carried into the hyper specialty movement. But at the same time, man, I was the hyper specialty guy before it even was a thing. I had a roasting retail shop in 1997 where I had a 30-pound Diedrich roasting at the shop. I had a coffee bar. We had something called the loaded latte bar where we'd do lattes with alcohol. We're 97, man. The problem was that we were too far ahead of our time. So, the Orgullo Latino stems from that because what also happened was when I would go to grocery stores and sit with the buyers, they'd like the coffee, but then I would find it next to the tortillas and the beans and the rice. And I tell them, well, this is a specialty coffee. Yeah, but it's ethnic. And so I saw this mental separation. People think you're either ethnic or
what?
Yeah. And so I purposely in 2012 put on the side of my bag, hecho con orgullo latino, made with Latin pride, almost as an FU to these people. Like, you think I'm, going to be embarrassed of my ethnicity, and then you're going to relegate me to a staple product that's, it was a shift for me. And for me, the hecho con orgullo latino and the whole orgullo latino narrative is we're proud of who we are. We believe that we've led the way with the African community and the Asian community and that grows coffee into what the industry is now. And I'm not going to let the whitewash part of the industry tell me that who I am and my community and my culture is not good enough, right? You can like your coffee a certain way, but why have to kind of come down on the way we've been drinking coffee for generations? And to be honest, a lot of them have been leaning into that. But so anyway, that's been a thing for us. And what I saw was my own industry kind of turn their nose up at me, and at Mayorga. And these are people who didn't exist, and frankly wouldn't exist if it wasn't for companies like Mayorga or companies like Intelligentsia or Counterculture, who were fighting this fight before these kids knew what it was. So to have kids who don't even know the industry, don't know the producers, don't know the struggles of Latino farmers, even say anything about us was shocking to me. It just taught me that there was a new wave of arrogance-led businesses who manipulated emotions from consumers to gain market share. And it's sad, it's frustrating, because I think what ends up happening is they look in this tight circle of, well, this is a competitor I want to. Meanwhile, the massive part of the industry, 95 to 97% of the industry, is laughing and making billions, not millions, not hundreds of millions, billions of dollars. While these kids are like crabs pulling each other down, and well, this guy has this. It's crazy to me how we take the second biggest traded commodity in the world, how we take a commodity that has changed nations, where nations still rely on as a major export crop, and we think we're going to change it one bag at a time. That's just ignorance. We have to go big.
Yeah, you. So you're like a water fountain. You know what I mean? Like a fire hydrant of information. Let me see if I can, because there's so many things you're talking. There's so many things. No, bro. This is why I wanted to have you on, because you have so much experience and wisdom. So let me see if I can kind of touch on this. One thing you showed me that I think would be really useful for people to hear would be on the importance of scale. And if you can touch on why having a strong brand is necessary to be able to scale, I think just because there's a narrative in specialty coffee that, like, honestly, in millennial culture and Gen Z culture in general, like, we don't trust authority. And I think that's a good thing. But because of that, when we get into these activist spaces, we're trying to create change without becoming a part of the authority. And again, that's a good sentiment. But one of the difficulties there that most small minorities businesses run into is like, once you hit a certain point, I just had a homie hit me. He was like, bro, I'm getting too many orders. Like I have more orders than I have the capacity to cover. And now you get in the conversation where you have to interact with the authorities somewhere. Like either I'm going to go to a bank to get a loan, either I'm going to take one of these Shopify loans, which if you're listening, never take one of them Shopify Capital. Don't ever do it. I wish I never even knew it existed, but please don't do that. But you run into situations where you're going to need to get access to bigger infrastructure, more inventory, more capital to be able to do stuff. And you realize, wow, okay, now I have to participate in some type of way, especially when there are farmers on the other side, brothers and sisters from the motherland on the other side who are dependent on you to move their product, right? And to do it again next year. What's your advice and what's your thoughts on like just kind of share your wisdom on how the perspective kind of has to shift on scale and where impact happens? Especially you shared a statistic about where most of the money is in the coffee industry and how that breaks down. Like you said, like, you know, you got your up to 20,000, you got your up to, you remember what I'm talking about? Yeah. Can you share that as well with folks? And then talk about how having a strong brand is important. And then we can pivot into talking about why I think Black and brown folks have a unique advantage when it comes to branding. But share that information about the industry. I think that's really, really important to hear.
You know, first and foremost, you know, you mentioned something about authority. I fucking hate authority. Sorry, I don't know if I can curse on here. I curse a lot. But,
go for it, bro. We live.
I think authority is, to me, a representation of the things that, and it sounds very revolutionary and almost like controversial to people, but authority is colonialism. Authority is enslaving people. Authority is, you know, making people go into generational debt. Authority fucking sucks because authority exists today based on who's winning the game and who's been winning the game for generations. So I would argue that you can play outside the structural world of authority. I don't have any investors. We didn't build a business on bank debt. You know, I find that the authority structure and the system that exists binds people into a false narrative of, you know, growth and success. You know, for me, the difference is that it requires patience, man. I've been doing this for over 25 years. And the problem is right now, a lot of people think they're going to be the next unicorn and I'm going to start a brand and sell it for 100 million. Cool. That's one way to do it. But then don't tell me that you're changing the world, that you're doing things differently. You're just playing the game with a different, you know, window dressing to it. To truly make an impact, number one, you have to be independent. You absolutely have to be independent. I sat down when I was in desperate times, and I can tell you, I've been technically bankrupt maybe 7 times in my career. And I've been desperate, and I've sat down with people, and they sit down and like, well, you need to, you know, charge higher prices, pay producers less, pay your staff less. But for me, I'd rather go out of business than play into that game. And then all of a sudden, when you take somebody's money, you have a legal fiduciary responsibility to your investor to return their profits. So, you know, you might say that, you know, my purpose is this. No, your purpose is to make money for your investor. So I think that's a big one. And I think I talked to you a lot about that. You know, independence is critical to be an impact. You know, as far as the industry is concerned, I think we have this very false narrative where the specialty, and I say specialty because I think we lost Bartholomew, and I'm still on. I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to message Bartholomew real quick. Sorry, guys. I don't know if there's anybody watching, but I'll keep going. You know, the hyper specialty industry, which calls itself specialty, but it's more of a hyper specialty industry, I think it's taken over the narrative of what coffee really is and wants it to be believed that, you know, the coffee industry, the specialty coffee industry is this massive momentum of change. And it is. And I'm not knocking the impact and change that it can have. The problem is in that narrative, we lose the reality of the fact that the coffee industry is so much bigger. I mean, extraordinarily bigger. Very few of these hyper specialty coffee brands do more than 5 million a year, which is a lot of money. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's a drop in the bucket in an industry that does $200 billion. So my focus has always been, look, I want the little guys to grow, because the more the little guys grow, the more they become big guys, and the bigger they become, they're replacing the older, bigger companies who have built a structure and a system of exploitation, creative marketing, and really keeping people in poverty in the countries where I grew up. So I think it's all necessary. Every aspect of the industry is necessary, but for some reason, I think there's this over focus on small is better, big is bad. And historically that is true. But I have to be honest, I've seen a lot of small companies blatantly lie about having certifications, blatantly lie about the coffee they're actually putting in the bag. So I think we have to be very careful that we want to believe if somebody's small, they're good. And if somebody's larger, they're bad. Because in my perspective, I started with nothing. I started with just myself, and we built this sizable company. And we've done it because we treat people well, and we make a good impact. So that's a big aspect of that. All right, let me check in Bartholomew, because I don't think anybody wants to just see me talk here. I don't know if anybody's watching this. If anybody's watching this, I think you can ask questions. So whoever wants to ask any questions, let's have a conversation here until Bartholomew gets back. Because I could rant, but I don't think anybody wants that. All right, so he's rebooting his computer. So yeah, I mean, for me, that's the reality. I want to make change. I feel an obligation to make change. I mean, I tell people all the time, the only difference, I'm not the kid that I see in Nicaragua gathering wood to walk 3 miles to sell it for $2. Is for some reason my destiny, right? I did nothing to deserve that. I did nothing to earn that. And from the day I was born into a family that could afford to leave the country, that could afford to make sure we were fed and educated, I had an obligation. And I think, we call it privilege, and people kind of knock people of privilege. Yeah, in relation to most people in the countries where I grew up, I was very privileged because I had those opportunities. But rather than sit back and take advantage of it for myself, I realized that I had to be able to do something to give others privilege. Because to me, there's nothing more sad than hardworking, intelligent people who don't realize what their future might be because they're in an industry as coffee farmers where, based on the past, their future is not good, because they saw their parents be poor and their grandparents be poor. And that's heartbreaking. What kind of life are we allowing people to have if we don't give them opportunity and hope? So I'm hoping somebody asks a question so that I don't just ramble. I see Ruel Braden saying, learning so much. Thank you very much. All right, let's see how we're doing here. Oh, there you are. You see, I'm just sitting here rambling.
No, I think it's the CIA, bro.
They don't like it.
Yeah, they cut it off. Here we go. So we're back. Sorry about that. Cut out for a little bit. But the stream is back. So we lit. Okay. So last time we were talking, you were just discussing the importance of really being able to own your own story, being independent. Share some more about what you were talking about with that. Cause you saved us a lot with getting into bad situations with entities who've reached out over the years and kind of getting caught up in some of the things that I think you've seen in the past are just not worth getting into. You know what I mean?
Well, there's two elements of that. Number one, I think the structure right now of competitiveness in the hyper specialty market is quality, 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 quality. That's a linear comparison. That's a linear, competitive advantage. If I wanted to be the most quality roaster that's just focused on points, I'll just buy that coffee. I'll roast it. I mean, I'll buy a fancy tin. And for the record, I used to buy full lots of Cup of Excellence in 2005 and 6, sell it through Costco.com, and then they uninvited
Wait, sell it through who?
Through Costco.com.
Wait, hold up. You gotta break this down for the people. So you're selling with Costco? You're a Costco partner?
But then Cup of Excellence said they didn't appreciate it. because I was lowering the value of their brand.
What?
We were the only roaster.
Costco though. Your coffee sold in Costco?
Oh yeah, we sell in Costco. We've been with Costco since 2001. But we were doing.
So if people want to go support your coffee, they can just go into their local Costco and buy Mayorga coffee.
Go to Costco, they can go to Amazon, they can go to mayorgacoffee.com, Whole Foods.
Wow.
But anyway, I don't know how we got into that, but
that's a flex though. That I think, especially as a melanated company, like when you think about being a minority-based company, you're getting into these larger spaces. We're talking about scale. We're talking about branding. We're talking about owning your story. Like you were able to achieve this, and I'm not gonna put your yearly revenue out there, but it's crazy. You know what I mean? Like you're able to do this while being independent. You know what I mean? While putting Latin pride, which is basically like brown power on the side. You feel me? You put revolutionary statements on the side of the bag, and you didn't have to compromise while getting the bag. Like how is that possible? And what would be your advice to people? Because there's this almost chase of like I got the newest, craziest kryptonite processed coffee. There's this chase to say, oh, look at my flavor notes, and all that stuff is cool. But over the years, you've been like, bro, that's not how you really make impact. And that's not really how you change the game revolutionarily on the ground for people who are in poverty because of colonialism, because of slavery. Like we're not going to make the change chasing flavor notes. Although those are cool. You were just talking about like, black honey processed, natural, whatever you was talking about, like at the top of the call. Like I know y'all make crazy coffees, y'all drink crazy coffees, but like that's not the point. So like, what would be your advice in the process?
What we do. Sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, no, you got it, bro. I'm really just trying to throw you the oop because you just dropped Costco out of nowhere and was gonna move past it. I was like, hold on now. There's a lot for people to learn and even how to get yourself there without having to compromise on your story and on your people.
Well, Costco Story is funny because I started doing business with them in 2000 before anybody was selling specialty coffee, especially through Costco. And that was part of the narrative where my competitors would talk badly about us, that our coffee was junk because we sell to Costco. Now I can assure you, some of them have used my name as being their friend to buyers because they want to get into Costco.
Wow.
And to be honest, as far as transparency, engagement, traveling to origin, I haven't met a better company. So just put that out there that whoever thinks it's not quality, they've sat in the back of pickup trucks with me in 4 different countries. And gone to remote areas and spent nights in not the nicest places. They're in it. They're in
little squatty potties.
Yeah.
Most don't know about them squatty potties. They serious.
You can get rough, man. You gotta have strong legs. Hold yourself up.
Man. That's crazy.
So, here's my thought. Look, you got to realize I'm the youngest of 4. I was a skinny little scrawny kid. I came to the U.S. I didn't speak English. When I came to the U.S., being Latino was not cool, right? The first major fight I got into, and I got in a lot of fights because my dad's philosophy was, someone fucks with you hit him. There's no coming to dad. There's no like asking, And so I learned very young that if there's a bully, you deal with that bully. And you carry yourself with pride, you carry yourself with size, even if you're a small guy. And I think the same thing was kind of really built into me by being a Latino in the States in the 80s, by starting a coffee brand and a coffee company. My brand was Cafe Mayorga. I was all Latino when I started. And I had to change that even because it was so looked down upon. Cafe Mayorga, what is, but my recommendation to anybody is like, if you are proud of who you are, if you want to represent that, you got to carry that on your shoulders. You got to carry that the second you walk into a room, and you never let that go. Because the second you do, it's taken from you. And one of the recommendations I gave you, I said, look, you're doing a lot of partnerships and that's great, but don't let people borrow your blackness. Don't let people borrow who you are to make money off of you. You make the money. You own it. You own who you are. You own your community. You own your people and the people you want to support. Don't loan it to anybody because people will borrow from you and then disappear.
That's a bar. Don't let people borrow your blackness. Or you can say, don't let people borrow your brownness, whatever. Don't let people borrow your boricuaness. Whatever you say, like that's a bar right there. So what do you think the power is in owning that? Like if you're able to maintain it, what competitive advantage does that give you once you start to scale?
Dude, I don't think there's anything more powerful than your soul and your purpose, man. And if you own that, and if you're bringing your whole self into situations and People who know me know, like, I'll dress the same where I go. I talk the same. I bring who I am everywhere I go. And if your brand in a situation like yours is a reflection of you, dude, that's your superpower, right?
Yeah.
Coffee Black is you. Coffee Black is your family. Coffee Black is the people in Africa that you want to support. Coffee Black is your all black supply chain. You're so empowered by that because you're bringing you into everything.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what a brand is, right? You know, people think they're Mayorga, naming the company after myself, is an arrogance. No, it's because it's me, man. I'm out there fighting. I'm out there trying to figure out,
Yeah.
the next 3 years for the business, building vision for my growth, making sure my staff is taken care of. So for me, brand is everything, man. And outwardly it's important, but the outwardly comes as a function of when you bring your true self into the brand, the market's going to love it. The market's going to see it, and the market's going to eventually see through the BS of the people who claim to be making all the change, and it's scripted and it's
Yeah. It's copy and paste. Like there's I spoke about this a little bit earlier, but there's this trend. When I got into coffee, most coffee companies had like 12, 18 different coffee SKUs, right? Which is like means stock keeping units, right? It's basically they had a ton of different products, and that's one way to do business. But when I started, man, I was like, I'm a teacher, so I wanted to be able to really make people Black people specifically feel empowered. So if I'm building a curriculum, I'm not going to drop every book on you. I'm gonna start with 101. And I was like, what's the most important thing people need to know? Coffee comes from Black folks who discovered it. And so we started with the Ethiopian coffee from the Guji zone. So we did Guji Main, and that was our first coffee, right? And that's going to be the primary coffee we carry. And that's hard sometimes in the specialty coffee industry because you, as a coffee nerd, you want to get into all these different coffees, and coffee consumers, especially specialty coffee consumers, tend to buy based on novelty because we get bored. And while that's fun, I think for me as a consumer, as I reflect personally about how that could impact folks at Origin, I'm like, man, unless I have a ton of money to keep buying all these different coffees on hand all the time, I may end up leaving people who I built a partnership with in the dust because I don't have the capital to keep all these coffees on hand at the time. So let's pick one community and really hyper focus on that, and pick one story and really hyper focus on that. And it carries the hip hopness, it carries the Memphis-ness, right, with Maine. It carries also the African origin with the Gucci zone. And it just so happens that there are a ton of indigenous Black folks there who have a really beautiful old sacred coffee culture, like Bunafi Nagea Hendabina and the Bunakala ceremony, and a lot of things we talked about in the last podcast with Kifaya. So I think that for us, I've realized, and from your advice, I've realized, man, we need to really be intentional about continuing to tell this story as opposed to me chasing industry trends. And what I found out when I went to Africa, we talked to the prime minister's brother in Ethiopia. We got to share the documentary with him. And part of the conversation afterwards was like, I'm just sharing with him, honestly, a lot of the things that make people excited in specialty coffee right now are trends, like the newest processing method. And like he was explaining to me how, even though obviously it's the prime minister's brother, they got plenty of access to capital, right? But the issue is in the country, the resources, the type of materials they would need to build these different processing stations or these different drying beds oftentimes aren't sold in the country. So it's not even a question of money, it's a question of politics, right? Because like these type of products aren't sold to these types of countries, right? And so he's like, even if we wanted to, by the time we bought it or found it, we couldn't get the materials, right? And if we could get the materials, we'd be 3 years behind, and then the industry would have shifted again. And now we have all this stuff and we're just sitting on it, but nobody's really interested in a black honey process anymore because we've all moved to carbonic maceration with fruits dropped on with cinnamon, guava, banana process, and all that stuff is fun as a nerd. But when I think about how I'm going to build a sustainable business and make impact as a person of color, I'm like, the best strategy for me is to focus on my ability to tell stories and to be honest and be sincere and to tell the truth. You know what I mean? I can't chase these trends. And for a lot of the folks at Origin I've talked to, like, they can't chase these trends either. No. Especially when we're talking about poor farmers. You know what I mean? Like, they can't trace.
I want to touch on that before.
Yeah.
This is something that's it drives me crazy. The narrative of, did we lose you again? I'm going to keep going. The narrative of we are in focusing on, we want to help small farmers. We're helping poor farmers. We're helping poor farmers. So that's your marketing hook, right? That's your selling point. But then who are the farmers producing a 91-point geisha? Who are the farmers that can afford to buy that geisha, plant it, wait 3 to 5 years, give it the fertilizer, give it the investment it requires? Those aren't the poor farmers. So we have this very disjointed reality in the industry where, and to me, it's fraudulent. We're talking about the poor farmer. Who's the poor farmer? That's the farmer we support. We love co-ops. We like remote producers. We like small. We have a philosophy, and not a policy, where we buy from co-ops or family farms where the producers live at the farm. I don't want the guy who has an investment and has a farm in the capital, and he also happens to own the hotels and the banks and the car dealerships. So I think that's also a reality we have to talk about. Not all farmers are the same. So this whole thing about supporting farmers is great, but what farmers are we really supporting? And now there's even a new layer of the expat farmer, the wealthy American whose grandfather was Colombian, or who, they leverage that Latino-ness, which is great, but they go from their, Fortune 500 job, buy farms, and then talk about the poor farmer. Well, it's them, So honestly, I think it's a lot for the consumer, but we as an industry have to call people out.
Have to think about that. You got to, and it that brings up something too. Like, we've done our second trip to the motherland now, and people ask us all the time, "Are you guys going to move there?" And of course, we're thinking about moving there. But when we move there, people ask us like, "So, are you going to buy a farm?" And I'm like, I feel like my job as a person of color who has access to the American infrastructure is to gain a market, hold that market, and use that to funnel USD, US dollars back into communities of color, whether they be poor communities of color here or melanated communities in the motherland. That's my strategic role, right? That's my job on the team, right? I'm a center, or I'm a point guard, whatever. That's my role. As soon as I start becoming a farmer too, I feel like I'm taking away from the people who I'm basically gentrifying the supply.
That's
what I mean?
That peeve of mine that, and people go there like rock stars. Oh, what are these people going to do now? And more importantly, how are you creating future opportunity? You're just working your way down the supply chain and taking advantage of the fact that you have more than them, that you have.
Yeah. It's like I'm no longer a partner now. I'm a predator. Right. And I think the best way for me to support, and this is another reason why for us, we don't put the flavor notes on the bag. This is why we don't try to leverage the work of the farmer to convince our consumers to buy the coffee. I try to leverage the power and the meaningfulness of the brand, right? And the story behind what we're doing, and the value of the art, and the dopeness of the music that we put behind it. All of that is why our customers are interested. Then they get the coffee and they're like, oh, I'm getting passion fruit, I'm getting dark chocolate, I'm getting guava, I'm getting Concord grape, strawberry. Cool. But that might change next year, because the rain could be different. And if you're only buying my coffee because you want those things, I'm basically leaning on the farmer's work to do all the labor to move the product and create the market share. Let me do my work as a creative, as a storyteller, as a rapper, as someone who's a historian, as a former educator. Like, let me do my work to create a reason and a story and motivation and a value with the brand as a brand. Right. And then that way, whatever's happening at the farm, I can share that information on our website. I can share that information with consumers through podcasts and things like this. But that's not the main reason why they buy it, which hopefully gives the farmer a chance to have some wiggle room. Right. If things change, I can continue to support your coffee, whether it's an 86 or 82. Right. Because I'm not leveraging that. That's not the main reason why. It's not just this novelty of like, oh, this is different, of this exotification of the product. It's like, you care about the people involved. Right. And I'm telling you about the people involved, myself, my family. We're all in this together. And you want to be a part of that movement and part of that story. So you purchase Gucci Mane. Right. And then it just so happens to be banging. It just so happens to be fire. And I know that that's not really it's not that there's anything wrong with flavor notes. There are a ton of great companies who put flavor notes on there. There are a ton of great companies who don't. But the point is, like, we have to do our part, especially as melanated folks, to own our brand, because if we really want to be good partners, good teammates, then like they need to be able to pass us the ball and we need to be able to take it to the hoop without them having to worry about us going back to them and saying, hey, actually, I can't sell this because, you know, the flavor notes are different this year and I really need to be the same. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to go to X, Y, and Z who has another similar, you know what I mean? Like that to me makes you fake. Like you're not really down with the movement or supporting like what's happening in the motherland, because I'm going to switch up on you as soon as the flavor notes are different. And that's so many variables that go into that. I want to be able to support you regardless of what's going on, because that's what it really means to be a partner. You know what I mean? And I can do my work to sell it, not just depending on what you've done to grow it.
Exactly. And that's why for me, it's funny. I always laugh when our competitors would knock us for doing blends. And my thought is, it's a lot harder to create a blend where I have to spec out my coffee from Nicaragua, from Peru, from Honduras, from Mexico, blend it in, roast it into Cabano, create the same consistent profile, do it for Muy Macho, do it for that's a lot harder than just being like, oh, this is so-and-so's coffee. It's a 981 point. I roasted it. Here it is. You're keeping all the hard work on the producer. And guess what? The second that producer can't deliver that coffee, you're out, you know? And we had an incident, you know, we went from the company name Mayorga Coffee to Mayorga Organics, which is still a company name, but we're promoting the coffee as Mayorga Coffee. I had a co-op in Nicaragua during the coffee rust in 2012. They grew 5 containers a year. We were their first ever export client. We were committing to 4. Another kind of cool direct trade roaster was taking the other one. Coffee rust killed enough coffee where they can only produce 1 container. And they said to me, if we don't sell to this other roaster, they'll never buy from us again. I said, well, sell them that 1 container and let's figure it out. I planted chia in all their land. We grew a container of chia. I paid coffee debt with chia money. I found out that one of the social lenders that was loaning them money was doing it at 21%. I renegotiated their interest. So all these things, being engaged taught me a lot. But more importantly, I was focused on seeing my producers survive and get ahead so that they could be in the game the next year. And knowing that Nicaragua got hurt, I could then ramp up a little bit of my orders from Peru. And why? Because our producers know the Mayorga spec, what they need, how it needs to be. And it gives us flexibility to grow. And if they have a hard time, to pivot. But it puts a burden on us and our Q graders and our roasters to make sure our blends are always the same. Now we sell a lot of, you know, direct origin and, you know, micro lot stuff, but I can tell you that 80 to 85% of our sales are our blends. And guess what? Nobody else is selling Cabano. Everybody's selling Cabano now, but when I started, nobody cared about it. You know,
when you get these huge like Costco orders, they're wanting consistency. So they're going to ask you for something that they can get, I'm assuming, over and over and over again, which is going to be a blend, right? It's going to be something that you can scale. The micro lot is obviously micro. So it only really works on the e-commerce space or in a small shop space, but you can't scale it to wholesale. And could you touch on this right here? You talked to me when we started about like why it's important to remain independent, why it's important to build your brand. We've had a lot of fun, a lot of dope collaboration partners, but you know, for the next year or so, we're really focused on just our brand. There may be 2-3 years, who knows? But it's because you touched on like when you get to a certain point, like your brand is going to be the make or break. Like there are companies who may be making even more money than you, but I think hear this as, especially if you're a minority or melanated business owner, like your ability to have a unique brand and create a unique story and have unique art and really be a creative and a person of soul in this space that's often soulless is so important, because once you reach a certain level of scale, that can't be bought. The power and the meaning and the integrity behind the brand cannot be recreated with money. So if you can hold that long enough until you're able to scale, once you're there, you'll have a competitive advantage. A lot of these companies that are, you know, hundreds of years old, they have zero branding power. So it's like they really are dependent on these younger, more nimble minority companies that are telling unique stories and authentic stories. You know what I mean? What's the difference there? Because you kind of broke down 4 different tiers. What are the tiers? What's kind of the point to continue to try to hold past? What can you anticipate as you grow? Because you broke down a point like once it gets to 50 million or something like that, like people get bought out. And I was like, you got to break that down one more time, because that's kind of crazy.
I mean, and these are not checked stats. These are my stats from being in this business 25 years. Well, let me start by saying in the past 3 years, I've had 7 offers to buy the company. to cash, no due diligence. Here's a lot of money. We'll take it. One was actually when the pandemic kicked off. I had a guy with his legal team and finance team literally called me. He's like, "We're willing to wire you the money this week."
Wow.
So, from what I see, and I talked about this a little bit when you dropped, most of these really small, kind of micro, specialty roasters, if they break 3 to 5 million, they're big, right? So they wouldn't even be small anymore. I think you have literally thousands that are doing sub 2 million, which is, again, it's a lot of money. And I'm not knocking it. I'm just talking in the scale of the industry, which is a couple $100 billion. Mayorga, grew through that very early on. And, we saw that once you can do things independently till about 7 to 10 million, right? Depending if you have shops, because shops give you a false sense because you have a much higher revenue, and maybe the margins aren't the best depending on how well you operate them. We didn't operate them well. But then there's no man's land of like 10 to 30 million, maybe 10 to 40 million, where you're either being bought out or you're going out of business slowly and not knowing it. Very few companies survive. Very few companies. You talked about authority and independence. To me, that was the Mayorga, like, we're going to break through this threshold, which is massive. We're talking about, 10 to 30, $40 million. It's a big delta, right? It's, $20, $30 million from one size to another. But to me, what's interesting is after that, you get into numbers that will blow your mind, and I tell people all the time in the industry, and I name names of companies that do $1 billion, 700 million, 1.5 billion. People that are in the industry have no clue who these companies are. No idea. I know because A, I've just seen them. B, most of them have offered to buy me out. Actually asked me to help them work on their supply chain. There are dozens, not a couple, dozens of companies that do no less than $500 million a year that you've never heard of. And most people that think they're players in the coffee industry have never heard of and would never be able to understand the scale. And to me, this is why, when I reached out to you, because look, there's a lot of elements with me connecting with you. Number one, I really like what you do, man, because you came at everything, not from a coffee perspective, but for somebody who's proud of who he is, proud of his community, wants to uplift his community and educate his community in something that he happens to like, which is coffee. Yep. You didn't come at it with arrogance. You didn't come at it with any kind of ego to it. And frankly, what I didn't want is for the hyper specialty movement to suck you in and brainwash you into, and we had some back and forths where it was almost happening. I don't know if we lost you again, buddy. So I'm going to keep talking. There we go. And I think what ends up happening is the specialty coffee world likes to keep everybody in the same circle, and they all talk in the same circle and they don't grow because their arrogance is so strong that they will not even give credit to the fact that there are players doing 500 million, a billion, 700 million. Some are doing good stuff. They're not all terrible, companies. Now at that size, they're going to make mistakes and, but this arrogance of small is good, big is bad keeps people from growing because the industry itself will punish you for growing. I could tell you stories. I mean, there's a very popular magazine in our industry where I was asked to be on the board of contributors. I was in the first ever magazine that came out with my name. A trader called them and said, "Hey, if you put Mayorga on this magazine, we're not going to support you because he's anti-trader." And they dropped me because this was an advertiser. So this this growing and being out there is not rewarded in our industry, which is crazy because I always say, like, the small guys are just nibbling at each other and the big guys are just laughing at the country club, counting their money because we're not going after them. We're going after each other. And I say, I'm not in that game.
And I want to speak on that too, because like we have several group chats for Black folks in coffee. If you're not in that, hit me. I can add you on the group me. But like we talk a lot about how as we kind of grow our space for Black folks in coffee, we want to have an industry that's not built on competition, but collaboration. And I remember somebody on Twitter or somewhere posted something and they were like, "Yo, Coffee Black is way better than this other brand." And I was like, I messaged them. Probably I was like, "Bro, don't do that." Like, we're not here for that. We're not competing with each other. We're competing with Starbucks. We're competing with Nestle. Like, that's the competition. We don't have enough to be able to compete with each other. Like, the crabs in a barrel mentality has to go. Like, each of us needs to be building our brand, because like the more brand power we have, the more we're able to actually provide a viable alternative for people on the ground in the motherland who are being screwed by these huge companies who don't give a care about them, because they're like, yo, you don't have another option. So you just sell to us or it goes away. It doesn't matter how badly we're paying you. And that guy was like, yo, I didn't think about it like that. But I was like, yeah, bro, each of us are going to approach this differently. At the end of the day, the more important thing is that we can scale so we can actually be a viable alternative. Because for a lot of folks, even though they would prefer to sell to folks who look like them or people who could like be a opportunity for their children to see themselves at a different point, like they don't have an option. You feel me? And so because they don't have an option, what up, Carter's Active Trading, they're going with the same folks who colonized the country 100 years ago or 200 years ago, who built a company based on their grandmothers and their mothers' oppression. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's funny because this leads me to, there's some very significant moments. And one of them was with my dad when I told him what I was thinking about doing. And he's like, well, why are you here? Get in a plane and go to Nicaragua. And my dad, by the way, was a brilliant economist, but his goal was always to get his country out of poverty. That was his life mission, and he died trying. The statement he said to me was, get down there and do what you need to do, but don't ever tell anybody what you're doing, and definitely don't tell them when you're doing well. Well, that's kind of messed up, man. These are like the people that he said, unfortunately, we still have the mentality of being colonized, where, if someone sees you doing well in a market that is, the US, which is not the most diverse back then in coffee, they're going to go against you. They're going to turn against you, and they're going to try to step on you to become you. They're not going to see the fact that they can be alongside of you. They can learn from you. And to be honest, that's one of my greatest disappointments in this industry is you've seen it. And there's a lot of people who will see this and know I've reached out to almost every person of color in the industry that I can reach out to and offer to be there, offer to help them. And there is this paranoia and this fear that I'm out to do something or there's an arrogance of, I don't need you, man. I'm gonna take business from you. I'm gonna beat you. I don't, there's so much going around. I mean, you've seen it. Look, you and I, we've talked about my support for you. I could easily say, look, here's X amount of dollars. Good luck. We've worked in a way that I'm trying to help you see it. And I told you, look, I've made the mistakes. I've seen the challenges. I want to help you to evolve past that. And I want everybody, and it's not just people of color. I want everybody who wants to do the right thing. I want everybody who wants to change the narrative of the coffee farmer, who wants to change the narrative of even what a corporation is, right? For me, one of my biggest challenges is, like, I run a company with a soul. I run a company where Janae, my VP of Finance, knows that her job is make sure this is the best company to work with. Make sure that people come in here, they're happy, and they leave happy, and it's working. I didn't lose anybody during the pandemic. All these companies are freaking out that employees are leaving. I see my staff go out drinking on a Friday night wearing their Mayorga shirts. We have to change so many narratives that to turn on each other is the most, I don't understand it. And I don't understand it coming from people who claim to want change. Because to want change, we need to be authentic, and we need to have open minds, open hearts, and go out there and do it. And we're enslaved by these systems and the authority and the things that tell us what's, and yeah, I was part of it. When I was in my 20s, I had 12 shops. I was in the Inc. 500. I was, my ego loved it, man. My ego loved it. And I realized things. I was in an ego business, and my ego had been taken over by seeing my name on all these shops and people recognizing me in the DC area back then. And wow. I was a tool for gentrification. I saw my shop in Silver Spring one time in an ad for development that had taken over affordable housing. And the first thing it said is, down the street from the Mayorga coffee shop. And I was like, oh shit, I'm part of the problem now. So I stopped opening rooms and I shut them down. And, I think part of it is, I don't know how many people authentically want to change. I think change and impact has become marketing vocabulary and marketing tools to essentially put more
virtue signaling. That's what I realized, man, is a lot of it is virtue signaling.
Yep.
Because if you say, and again, that's why I'm saying, like, people are using farmers' work and also farmers suffering to sell a product to customers without doing any of the work to actually change those situations and doing the work necessary so that, like, honestly, at this point, a lot of these companies, if farmers were ever not poor, wouldn't be able to sell coffee anymore. Even though the solution and the thing we're trying to create is that farmers aren't poor, right? And that farmers aren't oppressed. But if their oppression ever ended, a lot of companies wouldn't have a marketing strategy anymore. And that's obviously, like, you got to have some sort of planned obsolescence in your strategy. Your strategy can't just be built on mentioning people's oppression, because if you're making money based on mentioning people's oppression, then when the oppression ends, you won't have anywhere to make money anymore, which one means you can't support their flourishing anymore, but two, it means that you're actually contributing to the problem and benefiting from it existing. So for us, it's like, when we say a phrase like love black people like you love black coffee, that phrase is not built around mentioning people's oppression. It's built around imagining people's flourishing. And the imagination of someone's flourishing is always going to progress into the future, right? But at some point, based on what we all hope to see happen, the oppression will end. But then once that ends, we have to have an imagination as businesses and marketers and brand owners that is built around, like, sharing stories of beauty and stories of hope and stories of flourishing, and not just mentioning, oh, this person's poor, so buy my stuff because I'm trying to fix it. Like, yeah, that's a part of the issue now. But, like, if you don't have a real solution in mind and a better future in mind when you're marketing and telling your story, at the end of the day, if your story doesn't include a better future, then you'll never really feel comfortable with, like, allowing people to be fully empowered, right? Yeah. Or contributing to that, because the more they're empowered, the less you have an ability to use them. And that is obviously always going to be a conflict of interest. And I see that a lot in coffee, but I think it's not even just coffee. I think there's a lot of businesses that are not really built on, like, a fully realized humanity for the people that they claim to be advocating for. You know what I mean? And I think as people who come from these places, like, when I go, I see my aunties, my uncles, my grandma. That can't be the case, bro. And so if it's not something that I feel comfortable saying about my grandma or my mom or my cousins, then I'm not going to say it about folks in the motherland. Because at the end of the day, like, we're the same, and we share these same stories of dealing with and persevering through colonialism and slavery and all these things, man. I remember one time you were telling something, and we came up with this phrase called, like, cash crop capitalism or cash crop coffee. And I would love to rehash it a little bit here. And then I want to touch on what it was like for you to move back to origin, because I think there are a lot of people, especially in coffee, who are thinking about doing this. But honestly, I mean, Chance the Rapper is going to be in Ghana in January. I'm trying to be there because I want to be able to bring coffee into a conversation about, basically the first rapper to ever do a hip hop festival in Africa, right, is coming from America to do that. And I think coffee is a part of that conversation too. So, yeah, man, I'm just curious to know, like, what was the process like for you going back to origin, but then also, man, just touching on, like, some of the other things we've mentioned as well.
I want to touch on something that you hit that I think is critical, which is why the industry needs people of color, people with identity in the countries where we grow coffee. And I simplify it very succinctly by saying there's a very big difference between sympathy and empathy. And people in Portland and Seattle and their cool little leather aprons pulling shots may have sympathy because they see us and they see our people as human. But like you said, I see family. I see who I could have been. I see where I could have ended up. I see the people who enjoy the same foods and the same language, everything we have in common. And when you have that empathy, you're going to be driven to want to make that change because you see part of you. You see part of yourself. I got to be honest. I'll talk about my moving back to Costa Rica, but dude, you created one of the most incredible moments for me. A little, like, very not my character, because when you did the screening in Boston, and I remember looking around and I'm like, and remember, I've been trying this for 24 years to create, representation for the people from our countries and from our communities not only the farming side, but the consuming side. Black community and the Latino community is not considered coffee consumers. We're looked down upon. I'm sitting here in a church with incredible historical meaning in the Black community. I'm looking around, I'm seeing all sorts of people of color, Black, Latino, Asian,
Middle Eastern,
everything. And first of all, dude, it had such a cool feeling to me. I'm like, I feel like we're planning a fucking revolution here. We're not on site. We're somewhere else. It's a little underground feeling. We're watching this video.
We're not at SCA.
Exactly. Dude, I got the microphone. I couldn't talk. I started crying. It was the most incredible thing for me because, and it should be so simple, right? Because there's a lot of talking. There's a lot of, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. It took you to go and empower people to sit in that room in a church and have that revolutionary moment of, we don't need your fucking permission. We're going to do it. We're going to do what it takes to represent our people. And we're not going to let you judge us. We're not going to let you tell us what kind of coffee to drink, what kind of language to use, whatever. We're going to do it our way.
Yeah.
And we don't care if the industry accepts it, because personally, I'm not in the business for the industry to like me. I'm in the business of my consumers to understand who I am, what I represent, and what I give them too. Because we keep forgetting about consumers. There's so many coffee conversations that we don't talk about how unfair coffee companies are to consumers. They charge them prices that are too high. They tell them things that aren't true. We use the consumer as like this given, and it's disrespectful because consumers are also people trying to feed their families and have a better future. And for me, if I'm selling them something at a price that isn't fair, I'm stealing from them, point blank.
And it's important because the issue at origin oftentimes is increasing local consumption. And if we port these, if the policies are if the practices are unfair in America, then how much more unfair they're going to be when that's the model that we're asking people to copy at origin to create local consumption. You know what I mean? And I think like one of the biggest standout pieces like about going to Africa and about creating a documentary was really for me, finding out that there are beautiful cultures that exist around coffee that are not built around elitism, that are not built around exclusion, that are built around love and peace and joy, built from a communal perspective. Things like Bunafi Nagea end up being a Mayor House Lack No Coffee No Peace, right? These situations and perspectives shape the way coffee is consumed and can be models for how other people at origin consume coffee and create a culture. But if we're just using the American model, like you said, a lot of it is unfair to consumers, is super expensive, is really elitist, it's all super Swedish, minimalistic, leather aprons and Edison lights. And if we want to see people at origin drink coffee, like that model is not going to be, to be frank, the model that's going to inspire a ton of folks who don't see themselves already in coffee to then get in coffee more. You know what I mean? It's just not going to happen.
And personally, I think it's insulting to really, people want to believe that Latinos and, whether it's Africa or any of these countries are going to want something because it's Americanized, right? So their own version of coffee is not good enough. So we need to give them our version to make them feel like something special. And, this goes into, so look, I've spent 20 years building my supply chain. I had my head down. I was, the things I've talked about with you, supply chain financing, getting producers, pre-harvest financing, negotiating with banks, finding better. I mean, we do everything from even finding better sources for fertilizer. I mean, our engagement at origin is deep. I've spent years at origin. We've had staff that goes down there. I have staff in Latin America working full time. And I got to the point, and then so I moved to Miami because I was like, okay, I'm going to be closer to Latin America. We opened a facility, closed it down during pandemic. I could do a whole podcast on that. Then I realized, what am I doing here? I'm just going to live in Costa Rica. My wife's from there. I felt like it was the first country to open its arms to me. And, I'll never forget driving from Nicaragua to Costa Rica and like paved roads and peace. I just felt peace for the first time, growing up in literally a war. I mean, where we didn't go to school for a year and we had to crawl into the bathtub at night because there was gunfighting. So going to Costa Rica felt like better than Disney World, which is where I thought I was going. But my goal is to be down there and create a culture of consumption in country, not just in Costa Rica, in Colombia, in Peru, in Guatemala, in El Salvador, where we don't have to export our coffee for it to then be considered good. It's our coffee. let's teach our people that we can drink our coffee, have different preparation methods, have different roasting methods, it's our coffee. Let's keep it in the country, and let's teach our communities how to drink great coffee without the arrogance and the ego. So yeah, I'm down there. I'm living there. My son started school there for the first time. He's been homeschooled all his life. He just started.
Wow.
And my goal is to invest, not in farms, not in mills, not in anything where I want to build, but I want to create the demand. Maybe roasting and packaging as well. And I think it's happening in a lot of countries. I mean, Colombia has a beautiful culture. Brazil has blown up on their internal consumption. And it's not that we don't drink coffee. I think that I remember sitting down with somebody who I was working with, doing something. They're like, well, people won't pay more than 50 cents for a cup of coffee. I'm like, well, it's because you're giving them 50-cent coffee, and we've evolved and we've grown, because I can tell you, when I started in the business, people wouldn't pay more than $1.50 for coffee. But the U.S. consumer.
Now we got $12 pour overs for a geisha. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's insane.
It's crazy, man. So I think I want to try to land the plane here, because we're at a.
Oh yeah. Uh-oh.
We talked for a long. But I think that the issue at origin, when we're thinking about it, is like, bro, how can we really create something that people are going to be able to participate in? And so, like, for me, as I think about that, I'm just curious to know, like, man, could you speak a little bit as we kind of land the plane here about like something I think is a shared anecdote, and it kind of explains the need for Black folks, brown folks, Asian folks, for us to really get in here, because we have an ancestral knowledge that I think is missing in the industry right now. You know what I mean? And so because of that, I'm curious to know, like, what are your thoughts on, what are your thoughts on like this idea of cash crop capitalism? Like, what are your thoughts on that? And what does that even mean? Because I remember you were describing a situation that was so close to sharecropping, that was so close to what my grandfathers had to avoid, that it almost made me feel like, we were living in like like some type of video game or something. Because like it was crazy to me. So like, just as you explained the model for some of these farmers, I think it's important for us to know that a lot of these economic models are not unique to coffee, that they've been used for a lot of cash crops that have been used for like oppressive capitalism, whether we're talking about cotton, tobacco, corn, sugarcane, cocoa. A lot of these economic strategies are the same. So could you touch on that a little bit? Just if you were explaining how farmers get the terrible end of this economic system, like how would you kind of just sum it up? You know what I mean? Like step one, step two, these are how farmers are getting screwed over. And then for us, for you all specifically, this is what y'all are doing to come through and provide more equity and make it more just. Because you mentioned it briefly about the banks and the washing stations and the interest loans and, all of that.
Yeah, I mean, first I'll start by stating that to me, any system that exists only exists because there's people who benefit from it and they want to keep it existing, right? So, mortgages for people of color are the same, they're the cousin of the financial structure that keeps farmers poor. People with money know how to keep the money and keep people just hungry enough to keep doing the same thing every year and still be poor. And farmers in general, the ones buying it, not the rich ones that are doing the natural geishas, they don't have money to pick their own coffee, right? So what do they have to first do? They have to go borrow money to harvest. And that's where it all starts, man, and that's where it ends, right? The big mills, who tend to be owned by the trade houses that we're buying from in the States, and that own a lot of these small traders that are independent, but they're not, because they're owned by these big entities. They'll loan them the money, say, okay, we'll loan you the money, but the market's at $2.50, we're going to loan it to you at $1.20 because we're giving you this money in advance, and there's a lot of risk. You're high risk, you're high risk, you're high risk. And then you have to buy your fertilizer from us. And
that part
is what the price is.
That part was when I was like, oh, this is sharecropping.
Yeah.
Like, you got to buy the money to do the business from us. And then all the resources you need to do the business are from the businesses we own. Yeah. So not only are you buying your initial money from us, but all of the things you need, the instruments, the tools, the fertilizer, like that's what happened to my great-grandfather, Alexander Henderson. And that's what was happening to my ancestors on both of my parents' side. And it's like, bro, it's crazy to see like that's the same thing happening in coffee. And that's the reason why I think us returning to coffee is so impactful, because we can see these strategies and say like, oh, I understand this and I understand why it's oppressive. Because for so many people, this is just business as usual. It's like, oh, that's just how it works. And it's like, no.
People are not educated in their own industry.
Yeah, it kills your ability to own.
And, and it doesn't stop there, because these people say, oh, well, we're going to mill the coffee. And all of a sudden I start hearing, well, they're charging me 30 cents a pound for the milling, and my loss is 22%. I'm like, well, loss shouldn't be more than 12, 17% if you bring them a nice, coffee that's sorted, and your milling cost shouldn't be more than 15 cents. So it's everywhere. And here's the crazy thing, man, because I've had it happen, because I've sat down with some of these smaller groups and cooperatives that I'll renegotiate with other mills, and I'll be the client. I'll say, look, they're going to sell you the coffee for me, or I'm going to buy the coffee from them. I'm paying you this in milling. I expect this much in loss, and I control the situation. And what will happen, and this is what blows my mind, the producer themselves will be the ones that get nervous and don't want to do it, because they literally have said to me, these people have helped us for generations. And they believe that this is help. They believe that seeing the same thing every year, because it's just the only option they've had. It's almost like the Stockholm syndrome of, empathizing with a captor. And I have to lay it down, and the fear, and I've had some co-ops not move over to us because of that, because they're just afraid, because it's just what they know. And, and this is funny, because this is the conversation we were having earlier, where this is not even a narrative when you're talking about the hyper specialty growers.
It's not even
subject to that.
It's not even on the mind of the hyper specialty roasters to look for these kinds of practices.
They don't know.
But I'm saying, like, it's ancestral knowledge for us, because this has been what's happening to our people. So when we're there, these are the kind of questions that naturally come up. And I think that's why it's so powerful for us as descendants of these folks to have brands, because our brand provides the audacity to imagine ourselves from a position of empowerment. Exactly. And that's why I think our brands, and holding on to your brand and not selling out when you get to that 20, 30 million point, like keeping it, is going to be a flag to fly for our folks in the motherland to be able to see and be like, oh, there's a place for me to grow, not just as a taker, but as a maker. You know what I mean?
And honestly, this is and I know we're going to land the plane, but this is critical, because I could say this till I'm blue in the face and people won't listen. The solution is not just to pay more. Because if we don't understand the supply chain as it's financed, who are we paying more to? Who's making more money? We have to understand, and this is what drives me crazy about the hyper specialty movement. They care about points, they care about process, they care about this, they care about aesthetics. And then they just scream, pay more, pay more. Well, you're paying more to a trader who's owned by the biggest trader in the world, who's, learn your own industry before you run your mouth about the solutions. And guess what? The solutions aren't quick, and they're not easy, and they're not fun. You got to get down there. You got to learn. You got to engage. You got to fight. You got to sometimes even put your life at risk, because there's people down there that don't want change, and they don't want to see you take their opportunity from them. So,
bro, it's almost like
we don't.
It's like almost like interacting with the Illuminati sometimes. I remember, when we started, I was paying $6 a pound for Gucci. And I was so excited about that $6, because I, in my head, thought that me as a roaster, and I hope this is maybe a word for any young Black and brown roasters who get into the game. I didn't know any better. Maybe everybody else did, but I was like, I want to buy coffee from Black folks. I don't care how much it costs, because the narrative was the more you pay, the more you help. So I said, sure, I'll pay $6. And I didn't check anything. I didn't look at FOB. I didn't look at how many traders were involved. I was just paying $6 a pound for a coffee. And in my head, this money was going to farmers. I remember we hopped on a phone call and you were like, bro, do you know who owns the company? Because like the CEO of that company had hit us at some point and was like, hey, we're interested in kind of like building with y'all, helping y'all be supply chain partners. You're like, bro, these are the same folks who stole coffee in 1660. Like, these is literally the same Dutch company that had like you know what I mean? And I was like, what? But there are so many businesses under a business, under a business, under a shell corporation, under a business, that unless you're in the industry at that point, you don't know. And I'm just assuming it's going to. And you broke it down to me like, bro, this is going to a trader. This is going back to some of the same folks who like were a part of the original economic system that built an oppressive coffee system, that built colonial cash crop coffee into a thing that hurt so many of our ancestors. And I was like, I was scared, bro, to be honest, because I was about to build like a long-term partnership with these folks. And I'm not even going to say who they were because I'm like, I don't even want to get into like, but it scared the crap out of me, bro, because I was like, dude, it's so you realize you're in the belly of the beast and you don't even know. You know what I mean? And the solution can't just be pay more. And honestly, that's something that at Origin people said. Like when we went to Gucci, people don't know, but like 10% of our profit, the community holds equity in that, right? So basically $1 from every bag goes back to them. We brought like $3,000 the last time we went to Gucci to the community to say like, hey, this is your money, your product. We just marked our product up another dollar to be able to send that back to them. We want y'all to be able to do whatever you want to with it. We're not going to tell you, you tell us, right? And they're like, well, we need to build a school because like people don't have money for pens. And they're like, we want to build a kindergarten. I'm like, dope. And I felt bad. Like I felt like as, you know, we had that cookout analogy. I feel like I'm coming to the cookout and I'm just bringing plates. You know what I mean? Like you find out later. Yeah, I'm like, I'm not doing enough. Like you guys are doing all this work. You create these cultures. You're growing the coffee. I'm trying to help as a member of the diaspora. All I have is my ability to tell stories, my ability to create music, my ability to create meaning from a branding perspective. And I felt like it wasn't enough. But the craziest thing they told me was like, bro, we don't care about the money. Like we have food. Look, it's food here, right? Food grows everywhere. It's delicious. I lost a ton of weight in Africa. That's a different story. But they were like, the most important thing that you're doing, the thing that matters to us the most is the fact that you're mentioning our name in your product, that you're mentioning our stories and our faces, and that you're telling it not just as, oh, look at these poor farmers, but you're like, look at these amazing, creative people who started this thing, right? And look at these is who I'm trying to be like. Right? That's my workout plan is to go to Africa and just try to keep up with the 67-year-old farmers and coffee growers who are running laps around me. Right? Bringing my family there, my sons to see Black people free and empowered, doing business together. Like that's what matters. And they were like, that matters more than any amount of money you could come and bring. And that had to really shift some things for me. You know what I mean? Because the story I was told from Specialty Coffee was the way you make an impact is to buy the coffee for more money and to buy more coffee for more money. And as a small minority business, like obviously we don't come with my father's $500,000 loan for our business. We're bootstrapping. You know what I mean? We're maxing out credit cards and doing whatever we can to try to make this impact. Like, but the same thing they're saying, I'm hearing you say too, like it's not about the money. It's more about the meaning, you know?
And I would add that the money is important and the producer should be getting paid more. And I think the market's helping. But here's the thing that I would narrow it down to. Imagine the arrogance and ignorance, which to me is the worst combination you can have in a human, of saying the coffee industry has fucked over producers for 200 years. Now you, the consumer, need to fix it by paying more. What an arrogant, ignorant thing to do to get into an industry who has created poverty holistically across nations and point the finger at the consumer saying you need to pay more and not have the character to roll up your sleeves and say, what is the problem? How did we get here? And how do we get out? And to want to just throw money at it is the most ignorant and arrogant thing you can ever do. Now, producers should be getting a little more money. I agree. They should be getting good, better, more consistent pay, but it's so much more. It's so, we use the word sustainability. Well, sustainability is a very complex model, right? Even their own character, even their own pride, treating them with respect, engaging them, going to their homes. That's part of the formula. We don't talk about these things. It's just pay more, pay more, pay more. And guess what? Who makes more? The roaster, the trader, everybody but the producer.
This is how I think about it. It's like a pie, right? So you think about a pie, the pie is sliced up right now to where the producer's getting the smallest slice of pie. Right? Instead of saying, let's just give them a bigger slice, let's allow them to own more of the process or own more of the supply chain. We just say, we'll just make the pie bigger. Yeah. Right? So then, they're technically their little small slices are a little bit bigger, but so is yours and so is everybody else's. And the percentage never changed.
And
the
your slice is already astronomically big to begin with. We got to take from your slice and slide it over the other way.
That's the real thing. It can't just be, let's inflate this thing to infinity, because it's not sustainable. But if you are willing to give up some of the unfair profit that's you're already making, or that we're already making as people on the Western side, and share more equity there, then it becomes more sustainable, and it's a pie we can bake every day. Anybody baking 20-foot pies, bro, like that's too big. You know what I mean? It's not sustainable.
I agree.
That's it, man. Well, bro, thank you so much for coming,
man. You and I talking.
We dropping game, and I think hopefully we'll get the chance to visit you all soon. I'm definitely excited to see what you all are building. I feel like every time, whether it's Baltimore or whether it's Miami, or hopefully this year in Central America, like every time I see what y'all are doing, bro, like we just get really inspired to move. And I think there's like one last thing maybe I'll touch on. People ask us a lot, like, yo, why don't you open a shop? And we had the opportunity to open a pretty big shop that would have been for like a local university here. And I turned it down because I realized, like, we had a conversation a while ago, and you're like, bro, never open a shop. Even the coffee club we have, I intentionally say it's not a coffee shop. Could you break down, because just for a lot of young folks in coffee, the first thing people say, especially in minority communities, like the idea of being an e-commerce roaster or a wholesale or just a coffee company is kind of not a thing that's in our cultural vocabulary. Like the thing people most think, if you're in coffee, you own a coffee shop, right? Yeah. Why would you say it's important to avoid it, or it's worth considering to avoid just opening a coffee shop?
I mean, first and foremost, I would say that coffee shops are great for visibility and branding. So yeah, I get the benefit, right? People go in the shop, they have an experience. It's a human touch point. What I learned when I had 12 shops was I would run a cost of goods report, and I would look at the dollar amounts, and I spent, number one by far, my money was spent on payroll, rent, then milk, then pastries and sandwiches and smoothies, and coffee was like number 17. And it was a nominal amount. And I said, well, here I'm trying to help producers, and I'm really helping dairy farmers, my landlord, the IRS, the local tax authorities, and I'm busting my ass to do it, and very little is going back there. Number two, it's just a different discipline. And I'm not saying don't open shops, but you better have a model, an operational strategy, and somebody else better be doing that from the strategy to scale and grow volume of coffee sales.
Yeah.
And if you're going to do it, buy the building, own it, because at least be part of some longevity and have something for your future and your children and your grandchildren, because you're making those rich.
That point has been a sticking point for like real estate conversations we've had. And I took you, when you told me that, I took it, right? And I was like, hey, look, we want an opportunity to own. Even if we can't buy it right now, we want a lease to own, bare minimum, first right of refusal when it goes up for sale. But there needs to be some pathway to ownership. And bro, like that has been so offensive for people. More than anything else you said, like me saying, I just want an opportunity to own this building as the person who's going to do all the branding, right? Going back to the title, all the storytelling, the meaning making, I'm doing that, right? So the value of this building and this property and the value we're contributing to the neighborhood is coming from the people who we're in relationship with and the stories we're telling. Like, we want an opportunity to own it. That's been offensive for people, but it also has been a sticky point for me. I'm like, if there's not even a first right of refusal, we can't have a conversation about this real estate. Because
I learned that because multiple buildings we were in were sold during our tenure based on our lease, based on our presence, and these people were doubling their money on their buildings.
Yeah.
And even the one that I had a deal in, these guys bought a building for $8 million. They sold it for $17 million, as Mayorga being the main tenant of our, we had a 30,000 square foot facility. We had a deal to get a percentage of the profits, but they worked the math out, and the finance is so complicated that the profits were lost and dead. And we got into a lawsuit even then. And to me, look, we're talking about getting opportunities for our communities, for our people. That's also part of it, ownership, man. And for me, owning this 120,000 square foot building in Baltimore is just as powerful as being a Latino selling coffee from my countries into some of the world's biggest retailers and to millions of consumers throughout the country. It doesn't stop. It's not just coffee, and it's not just, coffee farmers. It's our families, it's our communities, and it's being leaders that are going to show people like us that come from where we come from, that look like us, to see that they can do it also. I'm 49. I'm at that stage. I want young people to see me and be like, hey man, I can move from Nicaragua. I can come from Guatemala, and I can go out and just run with it and work hard and build something of meaning for myself and my family.
Man, bro, that's it. And I think if that ownership piece like has been such a theme even in our time in Rwanda, Ethiopia, like we were talking to Samaya, who's the 2018 East Aeropress champ, really cool. She's like a sister now, right? Her and my wife are hilarious when they get together. And we were saying, man, if we're all at SCA next year or any of these coffee conferences, the conversation we want to have is on what you create. Yeah. And I think that like that is so true in coffee, but it's true in other things too, man. Like my man Rule, who is a black donut maker, right? And we've done collaborations here in the city. Like the reality of not being able to really own our land and the amount of overhead that adds, like that's something we've had conversations about. Like, and it affects so many industries, even from an e-commerce space, even from a brand collaboration space. Like if you don't own what you create, like you're perpetuating these same systems of oppression that have hurt us over the years, because that's really what it boils down to is a lack of ownership. Yeah. And I think that's important, man. And for us, we've like tried to create different ways of owning what we create, especially by one, like minimizing what we do from a retail customer experience, but two, like, man, if we're going to create experiences, like let's use the virtual space to create experiences. Let's use our music and our ability. You know, all of our cultures have such musical and artistic backgrounds, right? Let's use that to create value, even in an industry like coffee, and niche that down. Like all these different avenues, at the end of the day, if we can create value through a documentary, if we can create value through a soundtrack or albums, you know, we're about to hit 1 million streams on Spotify soon. Really excited about that. Like, bro, it's crazy. Awesome coffee stuff, right? Like we're about to, you know, from a clothing perspective with the streetwear that we do, any of those things, man, like if we can create an experience that we can actually own, like I'll take that any day over a space where I'm renting, right? Yeah. Like even if it's on the digital space, like if it's a space we can own, our website, you put me on game, even with, man, there's so much, bro, but even with just your email list and owning your email list and how that's more valuable than just a social media experience, because at the end of the day, you don't own your access to those consumers. It's crucial, bro. It's crucial. And hearing how many email subscribers y'all got, it blew my mind. Like, I'm sleeping on that. So we're about to hit 5,000 email subscribers, and we're trying to get to 10 in the next year. You know, but I think that, you know, your wisdom has really blessed the company, bro, but helped us to do a ton. I appreciate you being here with us, you know, and taking the time. You know, for sure, bro. Yeah, we got to do another one. We got to. Yeah.
Maybe you can go Costa Rica and do one down there.
Bro, that look, you said November, right? Look, let me know. I'm pulling up. But yeah, man. And hopefully we can talk more about these things. I know the Color of Coffee conferences, collective conferences coming up. It's the first like BIPOC coffee conference, and I had some conversations there, which I'll have to have with you online. But with one of our with folks who are importing coffee and seeing like, wow, a lot of these systems that I've talked with you about that are in Central America and South America, you see them replicated around the world, man. And I think that those of us who are from these places or share these heritages, or anybody who wants to make a power or make a difference through the power of branding, like owning what you create is going to be crucial for that in the future. So thank you, brother. Looking forward to talking with you soon. Catch y'all soon. New episodes dropping every week.